Kia ora, this is Liz. Welcome to Dame's Blaze. If you haven't watched the intro video yet, can I suggest you go do that now so you know what we're up to? Otherwise, grab your Bible and we'll dig on in. We are looking today at John chapter 4, verses 51 to 54, which brings us to the end of the chapter, amazingly. I'll read them to you now. As he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, "Your son lives." Then he inquired of them the hour when he got better, and they said to him, "Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him." So the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said to him, "Your son lives." And he himself believed, and his whole household. This again is the second sign that Jesus did when he came out of Judea into Galilee. Back to our nobleman then. As the guy is heading homewards, he's met by a group of his own servants bringing tidings of great joy. Pictures that I have seen of this event tend to have the servants quite close to the city, as if they've just come out of it to meet their master, but actually the word met in Greek means to go to meet as well as just to meet. I find it a little hard to believe, as do most of the scholars, that the servants waited to tell their master the good news. They may have waited an hour or so just to be sure that the boy was on the mend, but once they'd confirmed his healing, they would have gone quickly to reach him and perhaps stop him harassing the healer when the need for healing was gone. So they come up to him shouting, "Your boy lives!" What joyous words for this previously grieving father. The faith that he had rested on by leaving Jesus in Cana and heading home has been realised. Faith is like that. It is, as the Hebrew writer said, the evidence of things unseen. First, we must have faith without a sign of anything happening, but that doesn't mean it stays that way. We're often believing for something, aren't we? A loved one's salvation or healing, or our own healing to help with mental distress, and sometimes we can be believing without much evidence for years, and then we get a suddenly. Suddenly, it seems something will shift. That stubborn disbeliever will suddenly be convinced. The cancer sufferer will suddenly be cancer-free. The stroke survivor will suddenly have no trace left of the stroke. The person striving to find a job in an unkind job market will suddenly be given the job of their dreams. Faith is sometimes a lonely place. We can hold on for years, clinging to faith without any evidence at all that anything is happening, or even that God has heard us. But we need to continue to be persistent. There are scriptures that tell us that persistence is sometimes the key. Luke 18, 1 to 8, tells of a widow in the city who is a bit of a nag with an unjust judge. He won't give her justice, but she wears him down with her persistent requests. And Luke 11:5 tells us even more. Luke 11:5 to 10, more again. So persistent, consistent, believing faith does move the heart of God. The nobleman believed in Jesus' words and left without proof of any kind, but as he walks along the road, probably with his head spinning, second-guessing himself, wondering if he should turn back and seek more reassurance, he is greeted by his own servants with the good news of his son's deliverance. Now that his worst fears are removed, the man's natural curiosity rises. Was this really Jesus who effected the healing, or was it just a natural change in circumstances? So he asks when the child got better, or as the old language would say, when the child began to amend. The original word for amend was weird, because it literally means well-dressed. Odd, I know. This is the only time the word is used, and from what I gathered, not being an etymological expert, this is the comparative of a base word, komazo, which means well-dressed. So comparatively, this word means better dressed than well-dressed. Therefore, it got used to mean better. Don't ask me how Greek works, I don't know. In comparison to how the boy was when the father left, when did he start to look and act better? That's basically what the question is. Right? He's curious now, the father, to see if his faith in Jesus was misplaced or real. Did it happen simultaneously, or was it just a coincidence? The fever left him. So we're given a little bit more detail about the boy's illness here. The servants call it a fever, which in Greek means a scorching heat. So he was burning up, this poor lad, and then a miracle happened. The fever broke and the young boy began to recover. So the servants say the fever left him yesterday at around the 7th hour. Now, if we allow for John to be a Jew and use Jewish reckoning of time, That would make it around 1 p.m. in the afternoon the day before, and many scholars use this to indicate that the nobleman had stayed overnight somewhere, that he hadn't been in a rush to get back and confirm the miracle. But if we allow for John's use of Jewish time, we must also allow for John's use of a Hebrew reckoning of days as well, which means the next day starts at 6 p.m. and yesterday for them would be the same as today for us. The word yesterday is only used 3 times in the New Testament. Here, of course, then in Acts 7:8 when describing Moses killing the Egyptian, and in Hebrews 13:8 when we are told that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. None of these uses preclude yesterday from meaning something different to the Jew than they do to us. We think of yesterday as the day before this one, which starts at midnight. The Jews' yesterday starts at 6 p.m. Potentially on the day you're speaking about. Weird, I know. It all goes back to the creative week and the way that each day is recorded as being evening first and then morning. It is, of course, possible that he did stop overnight somewhere. Perhaps that was necessary in an era when banditry on the roads was common, but I think it would be highly unnatural for this nobleman to stop at all once he had achieved his aim and got the healing for the boy. If I put myself in the place of this father, I can't see myself taking a night to rest. I don't think it would be necessary. You would do your best to make it there and back in a day, and given the distance that we spoke about last week, it's entirely possible. I think it's adding quite a lot to the text to try and force him to stay overnight. Now, I believe the scholars that do this out of a good heart. They've done it to try and add weight to this man's faith, but it's a weight I don't really think is necessary. It showed more than enough faith for the man to leave Jesus' side at all with only his word. We don't need to add a speculative night's sleep into the mix as well. So the father realizes that the boy recovered at the same time Jesus spoke. And upon hearing this piece of news, he knows without a doubt that his faith has been real. Now that he has the evidence of his faith in Jesus, he tells everyone in the household. That's family, servants, and slaves. They're all convinced and fully believe. This kind of contagious faith shows up a number of times in the New Testament church. In Acts 16, we meet a wealthy woman called Lydia, who was convinced of the truth through the words of Paul, and she and her household were baptized and saved. Further on in chapter 16, we meet a Philippian jailer who is saved, him and his household, after Paul and Silas don't leave the prison when the foundations shake and the doors open. And then again in 18th chapter of Acts, we meet a leader of the synagogue in Corinth called Crispus, who is converted, he and his entire household. It's not meant to be a faith that we keep to ourselves, as if Jesus and God are a private little deity that I keep in my pocket and bring out when it's safe. We're meant to be excited by our salvation, excited by the things that God has done for us. We're meant to be bubbling over to tell someone what the Lord has done for us. But too often we don't speak up. We don't mention the good things. We will say, like many, that we were just lucky. When I had my motorcycle accident many years ago now, everyone said I was lucky to have walked away with so few injuries, and my invariable reply was, luck had nothing to do with it. Don't let people shut you up. Who cares if they don't want to hear it? Say it anyway. If they know where you stand when they are in trouble, they will know where to go, and then maybe they'll have a testimony of their own. Can I encourage you, as I encouraged this week's attendees at the youth service, ask questions if you don't know how to get the conversation rolling. Find out if they even know who Jesus is. The journey this nobleman took was more than just footsteps on a road. He went from curious faith to believing contagious faith. On the way to Jesus, he was hopeful, determined. He had faith, but perhaps it was best described as an old traditional type of faith, faith based on the laying on of hands. On his way homeward, he came into fully fledged contagious faith, faith that wants to talk about this man, this healing, wants to spread the good news that his son was once near death and is now alive. Do you see a picture of salvation in this story? We are dead in our sins, burning with a fever of satanic root. It's his words that make us alive and cool the fire that seeks to destroy us. We live because he lived, and we should, as the nobleman did, share the good news with the members of our household. Easy, of course, to prove the truth of God when your almost dead child is made well again. Not all of us have that level of testimony, but we do all have a testimony. If you get an opportunity to speak about how life is for you, bring God into it somehow. I can't stress this enough. The world is losing ground fast. People have been walking away from God for so long, they have no idea who Jesus even is, let alone what belief in him can do for them. Start being open. The worst they can do is never speak to you again. This was the second sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, says John. This whole concept of signs is a mammoth concept in biblical scholarship. Articles upon articles, books and treatises, all written about the signs in John's Gospel. But what I couldn't find out was what they were assigned to, what they were meant to be confirming. As we learnt last week, a sign is usually a miraculous occurrence given especially to confirm, corroborate, or authenticate something. And I kept looking for what each of these signs was meant to be confirming. John at the end of his Gospel says this, "And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." While the other Gospels have many miracles recorded, John has only 7. 8 if you include Jesus' own resurrection. Though these are the only 2 he calls signs, most of the scholars are happy to say that the other 5 miracles recorded are also signs. In order then, the other 5 are the healing of the paralyzed man by the pool of Bethsaida, the feeding of the 5,000, which is not the same event as the feeding of the 7,000, just saying, walking on water, the healing of the man born blind by the pool of Siloam, and the raising of Lazarus. These are the 7 miracles or signs that John felt proved his point. That would make you believe that Jesus is the Christ, that he is the anointed one or the Messiah, the Son of God, and that if you believe in him, you will have eternal Zoe, life as God has it, in his name. What do you see in the 2 signs we've already studied that might prove that to you? Do you see that he is creator, for instance, taking water, a common element formed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, and turning it into a highly complex mix of ethanol, glycerol, polysaccharides, acids, and volatile compounds, and not just any old mix of those ingredients, but the finest mix of those ingredients. This was very good wine. Does that phrasing take you back to the garden at all? In the very first wedding, a very good thing in the creative week. Next sign that we are given is about omnipresence, the ability to facilitate a healing from a distance, something that none of the disciples managed to do. If they healed at a distance, they used a handkerchief or some such item to be blessed and then laid upon the patient. There is an underlying narrative here that John is trying to convey with the signs. I hope and trust that as we go through the others, we will come to some conclusion regarding them. For now, I just want you to consider the 2 that we have just looked at. They indicate what sort of power Jesus carried and was able to wield. Look again at the story of the nobleman. See the progression of his faith. It's a pretty good picture of the progression of any Christian's faith. It starts with that initial introduction to Jesus, which leads us to the request that we all inevitably have of the Lord. There is a question of faith, of believing without seeing, and then the proof that comes into our hands. And what do we do with that? Anyone not of the household of the nobleman hearing the story he would tell would just consider this to be a happy coincidence. It's only those that are near and dear to the child that would know how impossible it was for the child to have simply recovered naturally. Sometimes it's easy to miss God's miracles. I think the world these days does miss many of his miracles, so we need to be pointing them out to them. Do some pondering this week. Consider what the signs that John has in his gospel are telling us about Jesus. And in the light of that, what do we do with that truth? That is all I have for you this week. I pray that you, your household, are both saved and blessed this week. I will see you next week. Ka kite ana.